Let's dive in. You and I are about to witness the royal drama we waited 25 years for. William finally snapped. He marched straight down into that dark storage room where Camilla had purposely hidden Princess Diana's official portrait, pulled it out, and hung it exactly where it absolutely belongs, right beside Queen Elizabeth on the Hall of Matriarchs wall. When Camilla finally saw it, total meltdown. Staff members who were standing right there said they had never seen her so absolutely furious. She rushed straight over to Charles, demanding that he rip it off that wall immediately. But what Charles actually did next turned the whole palace totally upside down. Nobody inside those walls saw this coming. It is the wound that never fully healed. There is a stunning painting of Princess Diana that most people have never seen. And trust me on this, the second you hear exactly where this painting sat for 25 years, it will completely break your heart. The artist actually finished this piece during one of the most extraordinary periods of Diana's life. She was at the absolute peak of everything: her stunning beauty, her genuine warmth, her pure innocence. When the artist finally stepped back and announced it was finished, Diana walked right up to it incredibly slowly. According to everyone present in the room, she just stood right in front of it, not speaking a single word for a long time. And then her eyes just filled completely with tears. She refused to let them fall. She forced them right back. Then she slowly turned to the artist, gently took both of their hands in hers and kissed them just like that. She was just a woman so deeply moved by what she saw, she simply did not know what else to do with those intense feelings. That specific portrait was meant to hang proudly in the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor Castle, a wall reserved only for the most important women in British monarchy history. Diana had completely earned her rightful place on that wall, but she never made it there. She sadly died before it ever happened. And the exact moment Camilla got the absolute power to make it right, she did the exact opposite. She literally grabbed that beautiful portrait herself. She carried it down the long corridor and shoved it into a dark, dusty storage room where absolutely nobody would ever see it again. When one brave staff member stepped forward and politely offered to carry it, Camilla whipped around and humiliated them so viciously in front of everyone that they quietly stepped back and never said another single word. She wanted this cruel moment entirely for herself. And as she finally walked out of that storage room and pulled the heavy door shut, staff members standing right there said she was actually smiling and not uncomfortably. She was grinning like she had just won something she had been desperately wanting. Now watch closely before Camilla ever got to enter Diana's house and take down hers. Beautiful portrait, she had been doing something undeniably cruel to her. She was constantly mocking her every single morning at her estate. In Wiltshire, Camilla would casually sit down with her cup of hot tea and the morning papers. And throughout the 1980s and deep into the 1990s, those same papers were brutally tearing Princess Diana apart on a daily basis. And they had plenty of toxic material to work with, because behind those closed palace walls, Diana was fighting terrible battles that nobody around her was willing to ever help her fight. Her royal marriage to Charles had already completely collapsed from the inside. Charles was barely present. He was freezing cold toward her in private and completely indifferent in public. Diana had tragically developed bulimia, a brutal eating disorder that was quietly destroying her fragile body, while she was still expected to smile, wave, and flawlessly perform at every single public engagement. She was throwing up multiple times a single day. She was losing weight visibly and dangerously fast. She was really struggling. with depression so incredibly severe that there were dark days she could barely even function. And on top of all of that, she was raising two young boys largely all alone inside a massive institution that did not care about her emotional state at all. She actually tried to desperately speak to top people inside the palace about what she was really going through. She begged for real help. She was told to pull herself totally together. So the pain kept building with nowhere to go, and sometimes it just slipped out in public. A slight tremble in her voice at an engagement, tears that she simply could not hold back at the worst possible moment. A tragic fragility that flashing cameras caught and ruthless newspapers seized on immediately. They cruelly called her hysterical. They called her unstable. They wrote that she was far too fragile, way too emotional, and much too simple for royal life. And on the mornings when the tabloids ran something especially savage, something about her shrinking physical frame or her fragile mental state or her tears at a public event, Camilla would simply pick the paper up, read the vicious piece out loud at the table, and calmly reach for her tea. And everyone present would just laugh. Her elite circle of friends, wealthy people from old aristocratic families who had always looked down at Diana as common and fundamentally out of place, would laugh right along with her. Camilla was enjoying it. You and I both know the worst part. Diana had cruel nicknames. Stick with me here, this scandal is wild. Some called her Bambi, all wobble zero backbone. But the absolute cruelest nickname, the one that they threw around most freely, the vicious insult that eventually found its way straight back to Princess Diana herself, was the clothes horse. Basically, just a wooden prop meant to hang fabric on. And Camilla. She never once told a single person in her presence to stop using those toxic names. She never corrected anyone. And then came the brutal issue of height. Diana stood exactly 5 feet and 10 inches tall. Whenever she wore heels, which she almost always did at those major public engagements, she was clearly visibly taller than Charles in every single photograph. So she started doing something heartbreaking. Before every camera clicked, she would quietly bend her knees, just a little bit. She would shift one hip downward. She made herself physically smaller in front of the world, just so the man beside her wouldn't look shorter. All just so she wouldn't be the one blamed for crushing his ego. But the British press completely tore into her. For it anyway. Vicious columnists actually called it her royal stoop. One brutal article described her as a woman who had absolutely no clue what to do with her own body, mocking her like a young animal that hadn't yet figured out how its own legs worked. Meanwhile, Camilla, who stood completely naturally beside Charles without adjusting a single thing, reportedly found this specific painful part of Diana's daily life quietly hilarious. Sipping tea and reading those newspapers, Camilla was deeply entertained. Now, there is one shocking account that has never been confirmed, and honestly, never been denied. At a huge formal dinner, someone in the room actually used the name clothes horse out loud, while Diana was standing close enough to hear every word. The entire room went dead still. Diana just smiled. She kept her face completely composed gracefully, moving on through the crowded room, exactly the way she always did. Because she had spent years learning how to perfectly absorb a massive blow in public without ever flinching. But one of her loyal private staff members who was there that evening later told a very close friend exactly what happened when Diana finally got back to her own private rooms later that night. She just walked in, She sat down heavily on the edge of her bed and didn't move a single muscle for a very long time. Her worried staff members stood nearby and quietly watched her. They later said that deafening stillness was actually harder to witness than a breakdown in tears would have been, because crying would have meant the pain was finally coming out. That terrifying stillness meant Diana was pushing it somewhere incredibly deep inside. Herself, just like she had been doing for years. Now watch closely because this is where everything turns pitch black. Diana died in Paris in August 1997, and within mere hours of her death being confirmed, way before most of the British public had even been told that their beloved princess was gone forever. The private phones inside the royal palace were already ringing, and those frantic calls being made in those very first hours were all about jewelry. Specifically, exactly which pieces of crown jewelry had traveled to Paris with Diana, which priceless pieces absolutely needed to come back to the palace immediately. A royal aide was quickly dispatched. A man boarded a private plane to Paris while Diana's lifeless body was still lying cold in a hospital room. He went to dig through her personal belongings and make absolutely sure the right royal items were secured before anyone had the chance to ask any difficult questions. That was the very first official cold blooded act that took place inside the palace right after Princess Diana died. And while that madness was happening, Camilla was already moving confidently through the palace halls. She had spent long years as the hidden woman Charles visited in secret while he was still legally married to Diana. But now Diana was permanently gone. And once Camilla officially moved into the exact rooms Diana had lived in, she did not just unpack her things and comfortably settle down. She immediately started erasing Diana entirely from the walls and the rooms, and literally every space that had ever held her lingering presence. Diana had always kept fresh flowers in the rooms she lived in throughout the entire palace. Right after Camilla officially moved in, she cruelly ordered them burned. Someone had to, can you believe this? Someone had to physically carry Diana's flowers out following that ruthless order all the way to the bitter end. And those beautiful flowers were burned to ash. The bedroom where Diana had slept, the safe room where she had pulled her boys into bed with her on unbelievably hard mornings and cried totally alone at night, Camilla had that very room locked up permanently. She honestly didn't want to sleep in there herself, but she made 100% certain nobody else would ever sleep there either. She wanted it sealed up like a room, holding something deeply shameful, shut away and forgotten. Diana's belongings were brutally boxed up and completely removed. Her iconic photographs were ripped down from ceremonial spaces all across the royal residences. And the legendary Hall of Matriarchs over at Windsor, that incredibly sacred wall, the very wall that had been waiting for Diana's portrait, simply never received it. Because even after Diana was dead, Camilla still found her lingering presence on a wall deeply threatening. William was 15 years old when he walked behind his mother's coffin through the gloomy streets of London. But he already knew everything. So what do you and I make of this? Diana herself had warned him there were 3 people in that doomed marriage. He watched Camilla walk right through his mother's rooms. All right, you and I are diving into a massive royal scandal. He watched his mother's photos vanish, keeping his face completely frozen every time someone looked. But inside pure burning rage, finally at 16 he snapped. He pulled a close friend aside and unleashed years of hidden pain, swearing Camilla had dug her claws. deep into his father never letting go. He blamed her entirely for his mother's death, because Diana was forcefully driven from the family, stripped of every single protection, pushed further and further to the absolute edge until literally nobody was left to help her. She ended up entirely alone, completely unprotected, trapped inside a Paris tunnel at midnight. News flashes hit stating reports confirm Diana, Princess of Wales, has tragically been killed in a crash. A 16-year-old boy spoke that truth. Then he locked it all away. He carried that heavy burden for 25 years. But William wasn't the only royal harboring deep grudges linked to Camilla. Enter Princess Anne. Her own wound cut way deeper, far older than Diana's tragedy. Her bad blood with Camilla went back 50 years long before that portrait got thrown into storage. When William finally made his move, Anne stood right there beside him. Diana's portrait returns where it truly belongs. The night before the payback, William sat alone in his study and made one crucial call to Princess Anne. No small talk. Soon as she answered, he just said, "She comes home tomorrow," and didn't hesitate for a single second. She replied, "I cannot wait to see Camilla's shocked face. It is way overdue. Diana definitely deserves to come home." End of call. Neither needed another word. Meanwhile, across London that very night, Camilla climbed right into bed, having zero clue that epic conversation just happened. What Camilla didn't know, what basically nobody outside a tiny hand-picked circle knew. Well, pay close attention here. William didn't just wake up one random morning and decide to do this. He sat through secret meetings with palace curators, mastering every single portrait placement rule. He dug through decades of historical archives, checking every portrait shift that ever happened inside the royal houses. He made absolutely sure every strict rule was followed to the exact letter. He needed it executed so cleanly, so flawlessly, that absolutely nobody on earth, not Camilla, not her expensive lawyers, not any palace official, could ever undo it later. The morning of the actual sting, William's elite team immediately booked Camilla, a fake public engagement outside London. The sole mission: get her out of the building and keep her distracted until Diana's painting was locked on the wall, totally out of reach. She left that morning without the slightest hint of suspicion. The Hall of Matriarchs locked down tight. Only a few heavily vetted staff members were allowed inside. Zero official royal diary entries that day. No press leaks existed anywhere. This entire covert operation was happening in dead silence. By early evening, Princess Diana's massive portrait was finally carried into the Hall of Matriarchs. It stayed wrapped up, trapped in the dark storage where Camilla banished it for over 20 years. The staff carrying it moved, incredibly carefully. You and I both know that feeling, right? Moving like you're holding something deeply hurt that finally deserves pure gentleness. Princess Anne was already standing in the room when they arrived. She absolutely insisted on being there in person. She waited way too long to let someone else take her place for this exact moment. The staffer assigned to remove the heavy wrapping froze right before cutting the first tie. She just stood there, hands trembling on the outer cloth. Then she pulled the linen. She carefully peeled away the tissue paper. And boom, Diana was back. Her face exactly as painted at the absolute peak of her life. One staff member in the room that night actually revealed that when Diana's beautiful face hit the light again, the whole room's energy shifted. Nobody made a single sound, but the gallery's air went heavy the second Diana appeared, and Princess Anne standing a few feet back, watching. Every single step of this process slowly stepped forward. She stood right before the portrait and stared at it for a long time in a total silence. Then she reached out gently, placing one hand on the massive frame and straightened it. Just a fraction. The way you fix something that's been sitting horribly wrong for way too long. Within 90 minutes of hitting that gallery, Diana's face was permanently mounted. She was placed directly beside Queen Elizabeth, two women side by side. Trust me, you and I just witnessed absolute poetic justice. Two queens of the noble house, one ruled for 70 years, one never got the crown. Everyone just stood there staring. And then Princess Anne muttered something quietly to herself. But the staff member nearby caught every single word. She whispered, "Diana belongs here." She always did. "Stick with me here because you need to know who Anne really is." Why? Because the way she was standing right there in that room, the way she rested her hand on Diana's picture, that wasn't random. Anne wasn't just backing up William like a good aunt. No, she had her own personal agenda that night. A 50-year-old grudge. You see, way back before Camilla ever sank her claws into Charles. Camilla's first husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, was actually dating Princess Anne. And it was serious, like talking about marriage, serious. But the royal family, they completely vetoed the match, shut it down hard. Anne had zero say. She backed off because in the palace you follow orders. And almost immediately after she stepped down, Camilla swooped right in. Andrew popped the question to her instead. By 1973, Princess Anne had to dress up or sit in the front row of the church and watch the love of her life marry someone else. She couldn't skip it. A top-tier royal skipping a high society wedding that would spark massive rumors. She had to show up and save face. So she watched Camilla walk down that aisle, taking the exact future Anne thought was hers. But listen, Anne wasn't the type to ever shed a tear in the public. From childhood, she was trained to keep a completely blank expression, an absolute poker face, no matter how much her heart was breaking. So she sat frozen in those pews, absolutely zero emotion, taking in every painful second of that ceremony. Now pay close attention here, because this is where a villainous origin starts. Anne didn't break down, she weaponized her grief. She took all that heartbreak, shoved it deep down inside her, and forged it into pure ice. She held on to that grudge for decades. Meanwhile, the woman who stole her man, Camilla, spent the next 30 years as the infamous mistress, tearing Charles' marriage apart. She mentally destroyed Diana until the poor girl was a shell and then literally waltzed into the palace wearing the ultimate crown. But insiders say Camilla was actually terrified of Anne for years. Anne's absolute freezing aura gave her chills. All that unspoken tension, it never vanished. Not even a little. Fast forward to right after the 2023 coronation. Word on the street is Anne cornered Camilla at a private lunch, locked eyes, and coldly told her, "You are not the queen. You are merely the king's wife." Savage. So standing in the Hall of Matriarchs that night, touching Diana's portrait, Anne was claiming her own piece of this brutal revenge. This payback belonged to her just as much as William. Later that night, Camilla came back from London completely clueless. She had zero idea the trap had been sprung at Windsor. She washed up, went to sleep, while right out in the grand hall in the very palace she thought she ruled, Diana's face was staring down from the royal wall, right next to the Queen. I know what you're thinking. Does karma actually strike? Oh, just you wait and see. Camilla was about to wake up to the absolute worst day of her life, a total regime change. The next morning, Camilla strolled down the hallway acting like she owned the place, totally relaxed, until she glanced up. Boom, Diana, hanging right in the exact spot left empty for 25 whole years. Camilla froze. Her entire body locked up mid-step like somebody just snipped the wires, connecting her brain to her feet. Palace insiders swear she stood dead still staring at that painting for a full minute. Total dead silence. And then A noise finally escaped her. The staff standing right down the hall actually heard it. And they later whispered it was a sound they had never heard her make in all their years working there. Like a car tire slamming on the brakes. Total panic. Then she frantically started dialing numbers. She demanded the painting. Be ripped off the wall right now, the palace's reply. A hard no. She demanded a face-to-face showdown with Prince William himself. Again, denied. No. Desperate, she ran straight to King Charles, burst right into his room. She marched right up to him and demanded he fix it immediately. She ordered him to make a phone call, to do the exact thing he'd done hundreds of times over 30 years, be her human shield, block whatever attack was coming her way. She waited for her knight in shining armor to save her just like always. Charles looked at her. Total silence. Nothing. She demanded a full explanation from every single staff member involved in the hallway's makeover. But the response? Still no. Every direction she turned, denied. So, what do you and I take from this simple? For the very first time in her stick with me here, we're watching Camilla realize she had absolutely zero real power inside her own royal home. And in that deafening silence, Camilla finally grasped the harsh truth she had spent 30 years desperately refusing to face. She was never his true choice. She was always just the compromise. And the man sitting right across from her had just incredibly chosen his own son over her for the very first time. He chose Diana's memory over her. He chose the exact royal institution. He spent 30 years breaking for her over their actual relationship. Right then, Princess Anne walked in. She stared at Camilla with chilling absolute stillness. Now watch this carefully. That is the terrifying calm of a royal woman who waited 50 long years and felt zero need to rush a single second of it. She dropped 5 brutal words. It is what Diana deserved. She did not even wait for a response. She spun on her heel and walked right out, leaving Camilla completely stranded there in the suffocating silence and left behind completely alone. Diana's stunning portrait is proudly hanging on that wall, now right beside Queen Elizabeth. Sapiti, two iconic women who gave this modern monarchy its actual beating heart. Finally united together in the exact place they always truly belonged. And incredibly, Camilla cannot do a single thing. Charles can't fix it. No fancy palace aide or expensive royal lawyer can ever challenge it. So what do you and I learn here? Never underestimate William. 20 years ago, he quietly memorized every strict rule so this exact revenge moment could never be undone.